So walk me through what you've put together here. So you have this new bill and then this op-ed. By the way, thank you, of course, for having it up on humanevents.com. Walk me through how this is going to really position the United States and particularly our military and I guess a whole of government focus, it seems like, towards actually combating the cartels that have just been allowed to fester for so long on both sides of this border.
Yeah, look, first op-ed among many, right? But this is the parting shot. And the first thing I want people to understand about the fight that we're in is that, well, we've been in the fight for quite a while. It's only in recent years that I think Americans have woken up to it, and it's because of the massive amount of fentanyl deaths that come from the cartels. But make no mistake, the cartels are a narco-terrorist insurgency that has been destroying Mexico from within for decades. And it's gotten so strong that it's time to act. And so what I want people to take away from this is the following. One, you're dealing with an insurgency, a terrorist insurgency. They use terrorist tactics. They use terrorist tactics to instill fear in civilians and to government officials. But they're also cartels and criminal organizations in some classical sense as well, right? They diversify their money making in a whole bunch of ways. They tap oil pipelines and sell it illegally. They engage in a massive amount of extortion, which has increased a lot in recent years. And of course, they sell drugs. Luckily, we've cut off a major funding stream for them, which has been human trafficking for the last 4 years under Biden. They could, estimates are about $12 to $13 billion a year just from that, because they charge you what's called a peso. It's like a head tax when you cross that river. And so at least that money has dried up because, well, it took Trump about 5 seconds to secure the border. So that's the good news we have. But we have more good news than that. We actually have a willing partner. There was elections in Mexico last year. And since October, President Sheinbaum has been in power. Now, she is a successor of the last president and has a lot of those kind of populist socialist tendencies. But on security and on who she's put in charge of going after the cartels, we're seeing a massive difference in their willingness to cooperate with U.S. forces and actually take on this fight. And what I want people to understand is that, again, this is a counterinsurgency strategy fight. And I hate to break it to you, but that means 20, 30 years. You can look at something like Plan Colombia. So Plan Colombia, I was in high school in Colombia when President Bush announced that, the year 2000. Back then, everyone we knew had been kidnapped for ransom of some sorts. If we left the city, we'd be kidnapped. Our family car was shot up once. There was a car bomb that went off in what was called El Nogal. It's a popular country club that people would go to. Places I would go to, places called like the Bogota Beer Company. The FARC had thrown hand grenades inside. It was a war. There was a literal counterinsurgency. The last couple of decades, that's changed. I mean, there's still problems in Colombia, but it's vastly different and vastly safer than it was before. So if you commit to a strategy, it does work, but you have to have a willing partner and you got to be willing to commit the resources. We have a willing partner, finally, and we have President Trump, who has said this will be a priority. One of the first things he did was designate the cartels as terrorist organizations. That has gotten everybody focused, I think, in the right direction. And that direction needs to be a counterinsurgency strategy where we rid Mexico, our biggest trading partner, of this narco-terrorist threat.
Well, and this is something as well where you saw people in the MAGA movement and people say, okay, we don't want these wars overseas. And people were saying there was this not as much appetite for that as there had been in the past. I say, well, this isn't overseas. This is our backyard. Okay, this is our next door neighbor. And it is obviously in direct. And I certainly hope that there aren't any people out there who actually think, oh, this isn't something we should know. This is direct effect on U.S. national interests if we have these narco-terror organizations operating on the country that we share a border with. It's ridiculous. And so I think all of those arguments kind of fly out the window. And I've said for years, for absolute years, and people can go back and look, I've said that this type of strategy is something I would wholeheartedly endorse and support because it's what we need to be able to help Mexico, right? It's sort of the cliche, but we do need to make Mexico great again because it directly affects us in the United States In addition to, as you say, the human trafficking, the fentanyl deaths, the killing, all of the stuff, all of this that's going on. This isn't good for anybody. And we see so much of this border violence, of course, spills over into the United States as well. And a lot of these organizations, you mentioned the Jalisco Cartel, the New Generation Cartel, and so many others. These guys are brutal. These are absolutely brutal, the same way insurgents have been when they're faced in other parts of the world.
Yeah, I mean, they operate as paramilitaries. The Jalisco cartel in particular is extremely militarized. The Sinaloa cartel is a bit more what you would think of as sort of like the Godfather type cartel, a little bit more traditional, but still violent as hell. And across the board, what people don't understand either is cartel culture. These people engage in effectively a death worship, like a worship of the occult. I mean, they're part of their strategy in bringing in new recruits is to shoot one of them, make the other one eat the flesh of that one. If they refuse to shoot that one, make the next one eat the flesh of that one. That's how deranged they are. You think ISIS is deranged? They learned all their derangement from the cartels. This has been going on for a couple decades. And as you said too, politically, this is a rather unifying strategy, right? Like obviously, the Republican Party, we debate constantly about like how we should be using our foreign policy powers. But this is both bipartisan and unifying amongst the parties. Very few. Obviously, people have concerns. Well, how can you partner with a corrupt government in Mexico? And my answer to that is, well, you're never going to get the perfect situation. So what's your answer? Do nothing? That can't be your answer. We've partnered with much worse, right? Like just try dealing with Iraqis and Afghanis. Trust me, this is, and also if you want to reduce the corruption, you actually have to be there on the ground. American influence does have an effect. The counterinsurgency doctrine gets a bad name because people think we failed at doing it. It's not really true. It worked pretty well. What we failed at was realizing that it's a 20-year strategy. It takes a long time. And only in places like Colombia have we actually bothered to continue to commit the resources. And guess what? It actually works. So, and when it's your biggest trading partner and your neighbor and your backyard, and like we are so fused together, as you mentioned, just as two countries, it's not a threat that you can ignore. We cannot have a failed state on our border. It just cannot happen. And exactly, make Mexico great again. Like I tell Mexicans this all the time because they're like, oh, you want to invade us? No, we don't. We want you to be prosperous and safe, and we want you to thrive.